hope the theme of this talk will be God is not slow regarding his promise. Brother Brown.
Before beginning to discuss that theme, I'd like to first take the opportunity to bring you love and greetings from the complex in the state of New York, meaning Brooklyn, Patterson, and Wallkill, and in particular from our own home congregation there, Brooklyn, Kingston, which is made up of 90% of our Haitian brothers and sisters. Would you accept their love and greetings? Now, let your minds drift back to the 7th century BCE. That was during the time that Jehovah's servants, and in particular his prophets, were very concerned about getting all of the people back on track in their service to God. What the prophets saw was very disturbing to them. And these things you've read about in the Bible time and again. But in particular, the prophet Habakkuk was very concerned. And his concern was everywhere he looked, there was distress, hardship, trouble, breaking of Jehovah's law. And of course, the prophet saw that this situation certainly could not be one pleasing to God. And so he had a big question that he wanted to present really to Jehovah God, but in a sense it was quite rhetorical. I'd like you to turn to that in your Bible and get please Habakkuk chapter 1. A short book, one of the so-called minor prophets, but not minor as to its significance, but as to its length. A little difficult to find, but it'll be worth your while to locate Habakkuk chapter 1. And just keep turning until you get to it. Don't be embarrassed if you don't get to the first time. Now, chapter 1, you see someone that needs a little help, give them a little help. All right, now, let's see what he was concerned about. Habakkuk chapter 1. Now look at verses 2 and 3. He says, "How long, O Jehovah, must I cry for help, and you do not heed? How long shall I call to you for aid from violence, and you do not save? Why is it that you make me see what is hurtful, and you keep looking upon mere trouble? And why are despoiling and violence in front of me? And why does quarreling occur? And why is strife here?" Series of questions. But we can get his feeling as we read it. The bottom line question that the faithful prophet had to Jehovah: how long are you going to put up with this? Now, he was acquainted with other prophets that had said, ultimately, Jehovah's going to put an end to all of this. But at this point in time, things were so bad, he wanted to know, how long is this going to go on? And you do nothing about it. We know you can. You have prophesied. You're going to do something about it. But he says, my question is, how long is it going to be? Now, the reason we wanted to point to that, you may have felt the same way regarding conditions we live under now, because they're very similar. In fact, if they had to be measured, the conditions under which we live today are far And there are prophecies that tell us ultimately Jehovah is going to put an end to it, but the question still remains, how long before you do? Now, let me tell you this, and it may surprise you. Those questions were put to Jehovah God. He answered them. But he did not answer them in the way that Habakkuk thought he would answer them. He took a little different direction. Let's look at the crux of his answer. It's in Habakkuk chapter 2. And there in chapter 2, look at verse number 3. And here's what he says. For the vision is yet for the appointed time, and it keeps panting on to the end, and it will not tell a lie. Even if it should delay, keep in expectation of it, for it will without fail come true. It will not lie. Strong, wasn't it? Now, he didn't tell him the day or the hour it was going to come. He just assured him, it's going to come about. What you need to make sure of is that you keep in expectation of it. Now, what Habakkuk needed to know from this is that from God's point of view, the time to bring an end to all of this was already scheduled. Notice where he said there, and he said it very clearly, he said, for the vision is yet for the appointed time. It's scheduled. It's already a part of how God is going to manage affairs throughout the universe. And so he said, more or less, you don't really have to worry about it. It's the appointed time. It's a scheduled time. It's already been set. What you need to do, Habakkuk, and all of those listening and reading your prophecy, is make sure you keep in expectation of it. Now, so that all would be very clear that what God said he was going to do, he says, it will not tell a lie. Keep in expectation of it. It will without fail come true. It will not be late. A little redundant if you just take each word or phrase there, but yet it made the point. What God has said was going to come true. But now someone might raise this question, which is a good one, and we want to answer it. Look there in the 3rd verse where we read, where it says, even if it should delay. Now, let's just take that much. Even if it should delay. Now, that sounds on the surface a bit contradictory. Because on the one hand, God had assured him, well, it's going to be at the appointed time. Then he says, even if it should delay. How do you match that up? What is he talking about there? What is the message therein for all of us with this part, even if it should delay? Well, already he assured them it was going to be at an appointed time. Well, let's answer that, because maybe that's the way some of us are thinking, that at an appointed time, God is going to bring an end to all of this that we see now. But even if it should delay, what about that part? What is that talking about? Now my pause is just so that you think about it. I know what I'm going to say. Don't show me a show card, but answer all. What is he talking about? Okay, listen to this. It's very simple. It's speaking from the point of view of some of God's people. That they would be very much like Habakkuk the prophet, preaching and proclaiming what God had said for a long time. But it may be in their minds, they were thinking it was going to come much sooner. It was certainly the time for it. There was certainly a need for it to come and put an end to all of this wickedness. And so in the minds of many of God's people, they were thinking it was going to come sooner rather than later. Now I'm going to do a little experiment. It's going to work right here. I'm going to ask this question that can be answered by a simple show of hands. How many of you have been in the truth, dedicated, baptized for at least 40 years or more? Quite a crowd. Now, hold your hand up just for a moment because you've been around. Now, how many of you, with your hands up, you've been around over 40 years, would have believed if someone came up to you, let's say in 1970, and they said, you know, we're going to be around in the year 2010, doing the same How many of you would have believed that? Not a single one. Because we've had this sense of urgency that the end was very near, and although we didn't know how long, we were thinking it's going to be very soon. And if someone had mentioned down to this year, we're still going to be here, proclaiming this message, preaching this good news, gathering disciples and bringing them to the organization, we would have felt that person was lacking in faith. He didn't really think that he can. Okay, go back to the point we were making. We didn't even deal with all of the others. I mean, there are many here who have been in the truth 20, 30, or 10 years and served very faithfully. But the point to be made was, many of us were thinking the end was going to come very soon, and we certainly didn't think when we started that we had 40 or 50 years still to go before the end would come. That's what he meant when the prophet said, even if it should delay. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I think those of us who have been faithfully serving know, well, that's what has protected me, because I've kept it more or less in high gear, moving right along and advancing with the truth, because we all thought it was going to be tomorrow, and if it didn't come tomorrow, it was going to come this evening or sooner. But that kept us motivated and doing what God said. So clearly, very much like the prophet Habakkuk was expressing himself, I think it's near, very, very near. I don't know how long, but I want to keep an expectation of it. So clearly the Bible shows some of God's people, maybe most, maybe all, felt that it was not going to be as long as it has turned out to be. And that's why he added, keep in expectation of it. And certainly that's commendable to see those who have been doing this 40 or 50 years are still happy. You're still glad to do it. Now, here's our situation now. Some of the writers have said, well, where we are now is like the age, and we had to get a little title to it, the age of instant gratification. Now, what they meant is, we would come to an age or a period of time where if there was anything good to come, We wanted it right away. We wanted it yesterday. And so that's why they say, well, this is the age of instant gratification. No one wants to wait on anything. They want it immediately or right now. Now, why are they pushed in this direction? Very simple. As humans, we have a very short lifespan. 70 years if we get some special mightiness, 80 or more. And if something is going to happen very good, we would like to see it while we're alive in our lifetime. And that's not just with us, that's with everybody. That's why there is this push on the part of people, particularly who do not understand the Bible and the prophets, to want something good to happen now, and they do things that even show that they are desperate. So in this age of instant gratification, there is the push in this direction. I want it now. It's sort of like we saw the drama last summer. Remember the so-called prodigal son? And he wanted to go out on his own. Not unlike a lot of young people today. They want to be grown, and when they get grown, they want all that they feel is coming to them. And remember, the younger son there felt he had an inheritance. Now, usually, when do you get an inheritance? It's usually the demise of your parents. But remember how in the drama, his words are recorded in the Bible, where he went up to the father, and the prodigal son said, "Father, give me the part of the property that falls to my share." Luke 15:12. So in other words, he went right up there. There are some things I want to do, and what is going to be my share, I want it now. Let me have it now. And we saw what happened. He went out and got into all kind of trouble and ruined his life, squandered what was given him before he really came to his senses. Well, that's sort of the feeling of people that live in our time. They want to have it now because they're feeling, how much time do I have? If I'm going to use or enjoy or benefit from something, I only have this little time to do it. Thus, so many have said this is the age of instant gratification. Now, the opposite of that, and this is what I want to bring in that is beneficial to us, is what we refer to as deferred or delayed gratification. Instant gratification, I want it now, give it to me now, I have to have it now. Deferred or delayed gratification, that's someone kind of willing to wait, particularly if what has been mentioned is going to be good and is going to be satisfying, and so it is worth waiting on. Opposite points of view. Now, very interesting, there was an experiment that was conducted back in the 1960s to prove that humans, just humans in general, had this feeling. Now, the experiment was carried out right here at Stanford University. And the experiment was led by a particular professor, and his thought was, this is something that humans just inherently have, that they have to learn to deal with. So here's how his experiment worked. They called his experiment the marshmallow experiment. Now, you might be kind of unusual name, but you'll see why momentarily. Here's what the professor decided to do. He got a bunch of 4-year-olds, and he told these 4-year-olds that he was going to take them in a room, and nothing was going to be in that room but a chair for them to sit in. There would be a desk where they could sit at, and there would be a table, and on the table would be a bowl of marshmallows. Now here's what he told the 4-year-olds. He said, I'm going to leave the room just like this. You sit there. And when I go out, I'm going to stay just for 20 minutes. If you can wait till I come back, you're going to get 2 marshmallows. On the other hand, if you feel you can't wait, see that bell on the desk? You just ring the bell and I'll come running back. But you will only get 1 marshmallow. Now imagine, we're talking to 4-year-olds. So the professor set everything up, and one at a time, the 4-year-olds were brought in, marshmallows in front of them, the bell there, the professor right outside waiting. What do you think the results were? Yep, you're right. Very predictable. 4-year-olds, marshmallows right in front of them. They had not a surprising result. Some of them sort of held to it, but by far the majority, give me the 1 marshmallow. Because see, 20 minutes, that's a long time to a 4-year-old. And right in front of them are the marshmallows. Now, so the question came up to the professor, well, what did this prove there? Well, they sort of, over the period of lifetime of these 4-year-olds, kept in touch and interviewed with them, so that they found the ones that were able to defer gratification or wait were the most successful in life, because they found they were more positive people, they were more goal-oriented people, and they were more in harmony with the way things are supposed to be. Whereas, and on the other hand, those who took the 1 marshmallow, let me have that, I want what I want now, had problems in life and seemed to be, in fact, here's a little quotation from Science magazine, giving sort of a conclusion of how the professor's experiment ended up. And Science magazine said this, quote, to function effectively, individuals must voluntarily postpone immediate gratification and persist in goal-oriented behavior for the sake of later outcomes. Now, why are we interested in that? Well, that was an experiment. It proved some things true regarding humans. But let's face it, in reality, we're sort of in the same situation. We've been expecting the end for many years. Some just raised their hand and they said, over 40 years ago, they were thinking the end was going to come. And they waited and waited and waited. Even if it seemed to delay, they were strong and able to do that. And they're still doing it now. On the other hand, those sort of caught up in this spirit and this age of instant gratification, well, we need not speak about how many we could think of and that we know that used to be in the truth. They couldn't keep on for whatever the reasons were. They wanted something more immediate and now. So basically, this principle is very, very important to us. So when we think about it from a spiritual and scriptural point of view, what is it that we need if we're going to have this ability to delay or defer gratification? And in reality, we're talking about that wonderful hope of living in a paradise in God's new world. the question that we want you to think about. Now, I'd like you to look up something, and really it's the answer. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And note what it says there that can be very helpful in understanding ourselves and what's going on. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul's writing. Look at his exhortation there in verse 25. He says, moreover, every man taking part in a contest exercises self-control in all things. Now they, of course, do it that they may get a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible one. Now, you notice he highlighted self-control. He said very clearly here, every man taking part in a contest. You are in a contest. Of course, Paul was using sort of metaphorically the thought of a contest like an athletic contest. But really, his application is to the life of a Christian. That's a contest. It's a contest to see if you can keep pursuing that Christian course of life and do it in order to gain the reward that God is offering. That's why here he said, now they who are in an athletic contest, they're doing this so they will get a little crown, a wreath on their head. But he said, you're doing it for an incorruptible crown, meaning those anointed going to heaven. And for all of the rest of us, it means a crown of everlasting life in God's kingdom. What is it that we need? The self-control. Now, it isn't just in a few things. Notice it said self-control in all things. So it's true whether we're talking about food, whether we're talking about drink, whether we're talking about sex, whether we're talking about fun, whether we're talking about achievement. All of these are things that humans reach out for, seek to achieve. But in what sense are they going to be in harmony with what we want in God's new world? In what sense do they harmonize with all of the goals that we have in mind for God's new world? The Christian life course being likened to this particular course means self-control is very vital. Here's what self-control means, interestingly, from the point of view of the Greek language. The Greek word for self-control, notice this, denotes the ability to get a grip on ourselves. Now that makes the picture. The ability to get a grip on ourselves. Because remember, our arch enemy, Satan the devil, knows our personal weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, and he will try to exploit certain things in order to get us to go after what is not in harmony with our gaining everlasting life. Self-control means we got a grip on ourselves. Yes, we help others, but what's going to count is if we can get a grip on ourselves and keep what we do and what we think, what we do not do, keep all of that in harmony with God's will. Now, we talked about this principle in general. Now let's get down to specifics. Mention some actual things that can ensnare or trap people and things where they need to get a grip on themselves. And let's start first with sexuality. That can constitute a big test. And in these difficult times that we live now, it's very difficult for many people, including God's people, to keep their sexuality in harmony with God's standards. Now, God put it in the marriage arrangement, made it exclusive to marriage, nowhere else. No versions of it outside of husband and wife legally married. Now, that's where the problem comes in. Sexuality, sexual life and experience is not wrong in any way in itself, but can it be kept within the limitations that God has set? For example, the Bible also exhorts young single people unmarried to wait until they have passed the bloom of youth before entering into marriage, which of course opens up the possibility of entering into sexual experience. Maybe you're having problems with this. Keeping it in harmony with what God's Word says. Now, you add to that the many people that say, well, I have a very strong sex drive. And I'm surrounded by temptation, which we know that is the case. And it seems like everywhere I go, there is this temptation to violate God's standard. And so that has made problems for me. Well, let's take that question. That's the first one. It's a big one. Put it right on the table and ask, well, now, what is the answer to that? In other words, we know what God says. We know the human tendency to want to move things up, violate God's law as need be, and prematurely or improperly participate in sexual activity or become sexually active. And we also know the victims of this have fallen into this. But you know, the Bible gives a pretty straightforward answer. Turn, please, now to chapter 6 in 1 Corinthians. And here Paul spells it out in a way that is very clear. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now look at verse number 18. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse number 18, follow closely. He says, flee from fornication. Every other sin that a man may commit is outside his body, but he that practices fornication is sinning against his own body. Question on what we read. What's the answer to the problem? When it comes to fornication and improper sexual activity, he summed it up in one word. Flee. Now, someone says, and they said, give me the Greek on that. Okay, I can do it. Here's your word. Fugo. Fugo. Now, always someone says, could you spell that out? All right, I can spell it too. Fugo. P-H-E-U-G-O. That's Greek. Fugo. Now I want to read you a definition of fugo from a Greek English lexicon. We read the English translation. Nice one. Flee from fornication. We got the Greek word fugo. Now here's the definition from a Greek English lexicon. It says fugo. To seek safety in flight. To escape safely out of danger. To vanish. But when you think what the Bible said, that's the answer to it. If you do any and all of those things, you then are going to be able to keep clear of it. Now, we got that Greek word fugo. And it is also translated another way that we're familiar with a little bit. Another English word. Maybe you've thought of it by now. And that's fugitive. Now, I think you know who this guy was. Fugitive. Few of them have become famous. There have been others. You just couldn't find this guy. To chase them all over the world, here or there. Take all your clues, write them down, go look there. And wherever they would look, the fugitive wouldn't be there. He had vanished. He had escaped to a place of safety. And that theme idea was so popular, they made movies and television serials concerning the fugitive. So as we can take that and get in mind what the scriptures are talking about when it says fugo from fornication. Now, that very simply put means this. Don't try to fight it. Don't feel well there needs to be some debate on this. Or maybe I need to go to counseling on this and get a professional to tell me what to do. You don't have time for it. And none of that is going to work. That's why the scripture, when it speaks of the answer, it gets right down to what the problem is. If you want to escape becoming a victim of fornication, you got to remember Joseph and Potiphar's wife did the same thing. He left a garment there. He got away so fast. So it's telling us this isn't anything that you got under control. It is a strong temptation. And if you feel you can fight it, you need to fight with it in order to prove your faith in God or whatever it is, you're probably going to lose. Millions have. Millions still are. And so when it comes to living in harmony with what God says, that's the simple thing. Now let's take another situation in this matter of keeping our life in harmony with what God says. Let's take money and material things. This is something that ensnares me. The Bible speaks of the deceptive power of wealth, which means some people are deceived. They're not thinking what they're doing is materialistic or wrong. They find other justifiable reasons they feel to pursue wealth or riches as a part of their life. Take the example of Baruch. Remember, he was the secretary of Jeremiah, faithful servant of God. Baruch had served God faithfully for many, many years as a secretary to the prophet Jeremiah. But after a period of time, well, you know what happened to him. He got weary. It's been a long time. Jeremiah was proclaiming Jehovah's going to bring about a destruction here. He's going to destroy all of this badness and all. But Baruch just got sort of worn out with waiting. It was too long. The time was more than what he anticipated. And so he started thinking about backtracking and pursuing maybe some wealth or riches because, simply put, the end had not come as he expected and was anticipating. He got counsel from God. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 45. And you'll see here how, again, Jehovah stepped in, took direct action. And that proves to be very helpful. Jeremiah 45. Now go right to verse number 5. And it says, "But as for you, you keep seeking great things for yourself. Do not keep on seeking. For here I am bringing in a calamity upon all flesh," is the utterance of Jehovah. "And I will give you your soul as spoil in all the places to which you may go." In other words, Jehovah says, I'm still going to destroy. You're not going to save anything material. You're not going to save any wealth. I'm going to save your life. And if you get through that destruction with your life, that is what you have been promised. So he said, what you're thinking about, seeking great things for yourself, is not going to work. They're not going to save you. You're not going to carry them through the destruction. It's all going to be destroyed. Whatever you might feel, you accumulated or that you have. Well, now that's good counsel for all of us tonight. See, that's why it doesn't work for those that feel, well, I must have a little more security, things that I can talk. And if you don't look out for yourself, nobody else is going to. These are just worldly sayings that people sort of pitch around one to another to justify something there. You need a little more built up. Take this extra employment. Yes, it may interfere with your meetings and field service, but in the long run, it's going to be better for you. It'll make you ready for what is ahead of us. You can think of 100 ways to put it, but it all comes down to the same thing. Are we acting in harmony with the counsel that we have been receiving from God's Word? You see, people today thinking about the future, they're all caught up in this. Have you seen them line up to try to winning lottery tickets? Have you seen the pressure commercially telling them, get rich quick? You could be a millionaire. All you gotta have is the right money. And people are spending hard-earned money. Just take a chance on getting. Their chances are so slim, but yet they are thinking that way, and so they buy into that. They are forgetting about what Jehovah said so clearly here. It's not going to work. Yes, it may mean some instant gratification, but you can't take it with you. It's not going to preserve your life. You're not going to carry it through Armageddon. He told us the same thing. What you're going to get out of this is your life, your soul. If that survives, then the main thing has survived. We need to have that same counsel tonight, because these temptations to buy into this instant gratification, you will have no more problems if you're not a wins. And yet God's Word tells us, focus on the main thing that's going to preserve your life and keep you in harmony with what God is doing. Now, one other one that we should take here is the matter of prominence, position. Nowadays, people want to be something. And they don't want to be just the average Joe or Jane. They want to be kind of notch or two above. And you've seen them highlight certain ones and what they had done to achieve that. You have the Octomom. You have those who got into the White House party. You got that picture in the newspaper. For a few moments there, you call their name. It was advertised all over. And there's somehow the feeling, well, if I am famous, or a celebrity, or a star, I'm going to be better off than just being a nobody, like the rest of you. If I'm cut a notch or two above all of these others, then it's important for me. Remember how Jesus handled that? Now, I think you know the occasion. Turn to Matthew chapter 20. And this is when the mother of the sons of Zebedee wanted to have a little more for their boys. And so knowing that Jesus was the designated king of God's kingdom, she was going to pitch this to him, Matthew 20. Now, Look at verse 20. The mother of the sons of Zebedee approached him, that is Jesus, with her sons, and asked him for something from him. Now 21. She said to him, that is to Jesus, give the word that these my 2 sons may sit down, one at your right hand, and one at your left hand, in your kingdom. Good position. We can see why someone with these feelings was going to try to angle to get her boys in this good place. When the Lord was in his kingdom reigning, she wanted to monopolize these 2 important seats. She said, just get one on the right hand. I'm going to get a little glory out of this too, because I'm going to be able to say, these are my boys. There they are. So there is this human tendency. But now let me ask you this. How did Jesus handle this? Okay, read there at verse number 26. Here's how Jesus handled it. He said, this is not the way among you, but whoever wants to become great among you must be your minister. And whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. So in other words, he let them know, you got it all wrong. You are raising a question based on how they do things now in this old system that's going to be destroyed. He says, under the kingdom, if you're going to be the greatest there, then he says here that you will minister to all of the others, or serve all of the others, doing things for all of the others. If you want to be the greatest, then you're going to be their slave. Because the greatness we're talking about here is greatness as to servitude under the kingdom, and not these fake things that men like to put up. Well, what a deflation that must have been of them to do all that arguing and fighting that they did among each other to try to lock down these important positions. And yet he said, it doesn't work that way under the rulership of Christ. It works just the opposite. And he said, you can prove that now by serving others. And the way you are being taught to serve others is preaching to them the good news of the kingdom. That's lowly, humble work. That's going house to house. That's seeking out and finding the right-hearted people who want to do what is right and who want to serve God and do His will. He said, the way you're thinking now is all wrong. Sadly, though, and you've seen this too, even some of our followers in modern day time have felt that it's still very important that they get the edge by pursuing, for example, higher education. Not just getting enough education and training to earn a living, there's nothing wrong with that, but seeking degrees that will put them in a place and position of prominence, they feel, among others. And in particular, they are doing this at the sacrifice of their service to God. Instead of becoming a full-time pioneer or minister, they're spending the time putting it into education to get a degree that they can hang on their wall and that will mean something to them. This is why I admire so much what I'm seeing now at the World Headquarters there in New York, and that is seeing these young brothers and sisters still volunteering to come in. Every month they have another group that they have as volunteers that want to come and serve as well. Now these are people that have all of these opportunities if they wanted them. They're young people, 19, 20, 21, 22, physically fit, strong, and able to work. But instead of taking all of that energy and using it for something that doesn't glorify God, they're willing to use it in order to glorify Him, to do the work that needs to be done there. They are to be admired. They're the ones that are willing to make the sacrifice. So the big question then is this one. And this one is for you personally. Is there any goal or project, something personal, that's so appealing to you, but in view of what the scriptures say, you're willing to sacrifice it now in order to do God's will? See, it comes right down to what we illustrated earlier. It comes right down to the marshmallow experiment. Do you want something now that's being offered through Satan's system of things that's going to tie you up temporarily? Or are you willing to whatever they offer to you? You turn it down in order to devote this effort to see that this good news is preached. Why? Because Jehovah himself said he does not want to see anyone destroyed. If possible, he wants to see them gain everlasting life. So the most important thing, as our lessons have been telling us over and over in different ways, but here of late is like a theme repeated over and over again. The most important work that we could be doing now is seeing that this good news of God's kingdom is preached. So whatever might be our aspirations or goals or what we would like to be or hope to be, are we willing to sacrifice that? Or are we willing to go after the one marshmallow, so to speak, that's available now, and forfeit the future ones that result from delayed or deferred gratification? That's when that will come in quite strong. We have to look at it then, brothers and sisters, this way. It's coming right down to the conclusion of things now. Now, turn there to 2 Peter chapter 3, because this sort of sums up what is taking place right before our eyes now. 2 Peter chapter 3. Now, verse number 9 is the one that I'm going to read. 2 Peter 3, 9, it says, Jehovah is not slow respecting his promise, as some people consider slowness, but he is patient with you, because he does not desire any to be destroyed, but desires all to attain to repentance. Certainly we have the thought of God. He's not slow. He wasn't slow back when he had to bring to a ruin Jerusalem and Judah. Although some thought he might be allowing things to go on in a bad way too long. And he assured them that end is for the appointed time. But those same prophecies apply to us in our day. The end is for an appointed time. He has assured us he is going to do what he has written in his word. The time that he has allowed has only benefited all. You remember seeing those 40 year people who've been in the truth 40 years along, sitting right along. If we interviewed all of them and asked them basically the same thing, have you benefited by Jehovah giving you more time to get in harmony with his will and please him? Would you then be glad that you had this additional time? And I'm sure they all would say yes because they can keep improving. And maybe there were significant things that they wanted to improve in their life, and they did so. Well, likewise, with whatever time is left, He's patient with you. This is the time to use His patience to improve our service to Him and how we're carrying this out. Here's a statement right from the Watchtower. See what you think of it. It said this. It said, Jehovah expects us to struggle against our tendency to sin or do wrong. He said He expects us to do that. So all of us have certain things that we would like to change, we're trying to change, we hope to change, but He said He expects us to struggle against it. He knows it's not going to be easy, but it can be done. Here's another statement right from the Watchtower, just a little quote. It said, we will fight against our tendency to sin. So we're in a fight against whatever it is that is wrong. Well, He's giving us time to do it. And there are still battles to be won. We're in a struggle and a fight, and we know why. Because our arch enemy, Satan the devil, is working against us, and he's taking a whole arsenal of things that can corrupt and put us in a bad position. Are you willing to fight or struggle against those things? Now here's something I didn't tell you, I'm not going to tell you now. Concerning the marshmallow experiment. Interestingly enough, even back in the 60s, they videotaped these sessions. And the reason they videotaped them, in particular, they were interested in how these 4-year-olds would struggle against the tendency to go ahead and take the one marshmallow. And as they reviewed the videotape, they found it was not easy for these 4-year-olds to hold back. And as they looked at it, they were examining what methods do these kids use to try to hold back. Well, they saw some would cover their eyes. Because they felt, I can't look at this. If I look at this, it's going to go down bad. Then they had others that would kind of turn sideways and start kicking on the chair. They were trying to get over this temptation, this feeling I had to do something. Some started tugging at their hair and playing with the hair and doing all sorts of motions along that line. They had a lot of different things that they were using just to try to get through this. You remember they had 20 minutes and you got to figure it out. You're going to be able to get what is the prize. Some of them even felt the marshmallows that were like a stuffed animal, and they just started. They didn't actually all pick it up, eat it, but they just kind of close as they could, but not just plunging. Not just plunging in and doing the wrong thing. No, what the thought was, there were things they had to do in order to keep themselves from just giving in and ringing the bell and say, that's it, I'm one mark. Well, now, what does that illustrate for us? Well, it illustrates very clearly that if we're going to get in God's new world, we've got to have things to distract us from all of this out in the world that we can be doing right now, including attending meetings, listening at home, hearing about the faith of our brothers and sisters, like we did of those friends down in Haiti. A wonderful example when we saw the destruction and the poverty And yet, here were smiling faces. They went out with their Bible and their magazines to find people and to preach to them. And yet, we know for a fact we did lose a few hundred of our brothers and sisters there in it. But they went right ahead. And when it came to rebuilding and getting in a house, just a shed, a tin shed. It was the whole family, 6 of them, in a room. And did you see how happy they were just to have that? To be able to have a family, and then to be able to go out and to preach this message to others. And they had to have something at this time, because we're talking now, they're in the rainy season. And the people have been sleeping out of doors, on the ground, in the open, for fear of going inside and risk being destroyed by some of these aftershocks that are coming their way. And that's because they believe God's promise. They believe His promise that a new world is needed. Finally, look at the example of Jesus. Turn, please, to the book of Hebrews. And there in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, please. And in Hebrews chapter 12, there, verse number 2. And there at verse number 2 it says, as we look intently at the chief agent, the perfecter of our faith, Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, he endured a torture stick, despising shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's what he thought about. The joy that it would be being back with his Father, as he had been for an uncountable number of years. The pleasure that he had being in the company of God and listening to his wisdom. The joy he had had in participating in our creation, this earth, and us, and all of these families. He felt, I can take all this, the shame, the torture, the despising, if I could just have that, the joy of being with my Father in the heavens once again. It sustained him. It will sustain us. Just the privilege of surviving the system's end and being in God's new world with our brothers and sisters is well worth it. And that's why now it becomes important to all of us show the restraint that is needed so as not to yield to whatever temptations that Satan may place there before us. But keep our determination, always remembering that God is not slow regarding